Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraim Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great and distinguished honor of interviewing Dana Goodier, who is a veteran teacher and current middle school administrator with over 18 years of experience teaching world language and English. Building off her own growth as a teacher, she is dedicated to providing schools with techniques to minimize off task behavior and to increase time on task. An author, blogger, and podcaster. I can't wait to learn from her. Dana Goodier, who are you?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Efrion. I'm a passionate educator. I'm somebody who got into education because I have a passion for teaching languages. I'm still highly involved with the state's World Language Teacher Organization as president elect. So, really wanting to teach kids about the cultures of French speaking countries and German speaking countries. And when I got into administration is because, I saw what was happening in a lot of the schools and just the lack of support for teachers. And so I really, wanted to step into that role to help not only the staff, but also the culture of the school, which trickles down from the leadership to the students via the teachers. So I'm happy to be here today and talk shop.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Dana, can you walk us through your professional journey up to this point?
well, um, so I write blogs for Teach Better Team, and I remember at the beginning of we just ended, the 22-23 school year, at least here in Colorado. I know some people are still going, but at the beginning of this school year, I wrote a blog post about 20 years in K-12 education. So I've been in education for 23 years, but I taught for a couple of years at the grad school. I was a grad school intern, so taught a couple of years. English for people who were learning pedagogy to be English teachers in French speaking Quebec in Canada. And then I went in, came to Colorado 21 years ago now and started teaching French. So I taught French for about 13 years. And during that time, I was in a department chair, two different high schools. I worked as a gifted, talented co-coordinator, and really took an interest in attendance as a teacher. So the last high school I taught at, we did standards based grading. And that was like you hit learning targets basically whenever during the semester at your own pace. But for the students who had significant absences, it was very hard to help them get caught up learning the different skills in French 1 and French 2. So, I was always involved in attendance committees and trying to find ways to keep students in class and also out of the hallways and really engaging students. So my last regular teaching was about 8 years ago, and then that trickled over to being an administrator. So working a lot with families and supporting them and getting their students to come to school, and also helping teachers in the classroom, as you mentioned in my bio. I do a lot of PD at the school and district level, facilitate and develop, but I also like to speak at conferences. So I am going to speak in about 2 weeks at a conference here in Denver called Global Minded. And so I'm doing a presentation on, connections with families. And then so far, I'm also signed up to speak at AMLE in November. So it's a passion of mine to really get the word out there to help educators with strategies to succeed in the classroom, to connect with students. So also, you mentioned I'm a podcaster. I've hosted the Out of the Trenches podcast for a little over 3 years now. So I'm really excited to be on somebody else's podcast. And I also had you on mine. So, and we're both on the Teach Better Podcast Network. I've been blogging since about December of 2020 with the Teach Better team also. So I really like providing that content to educators and, just kind of reflecting on my day. So, I wrote a blog post the other day when it was the last day of school, kind of asking readers to kind of reflect on the year that's passed. So, yeah, I'm excited to kind of talk.
what are
Yeah.
some of your reflections of this past year?
Well, I think the first thing that stands out to me is we're still coming out of that post-pandemic phase in terms of what I'm seeing at the middle school level. That and this is particularly male students. It's just that the need to kind of be hands-on, right? And this
Yeah.
could be it. And some of it's the aggressive, not warranted fighting, pushing, shoving, not necessarily all out fight, but the pushing and the shoving, but also just the really the just touchy feely, I would say, that's kind of a little bit more that I've been seeing than previous, pre-pandemic times. It's also it just kind of depends on the students, right? The group of students, but there's also a lack of engagement, obviously. But that, I think, is from teacher's classroom to teacher's classroom. How many students are going to be pulling up games while they're working on the computer, right? And how many students are actually going to be doing the work. At the middle school level, kids do not, take their grade as seriously because it's not going towards the GPA, towards college and career. So, some teachers that I support have been working on projects at the beginning of the year, or the end of the year, sorry, and then they were a lot of students at the end of the year just didn't have that, right? And they had like 3 weeks to work on the project, right? So students really not taking accountability for doing work that had plenty of time provided to them. So those are the negative things that stand out. But also, I think teachers are coming. The positive things are teachers are coming a lot more together to support one another. The PLC model, at least where I've been, is strong. In the grade level teams, not only with the subject area PLCs, but also the grade level teams. The MTSS model. Just really teachers. Voicing any concerns that they have with students, and getting support from admin and counselors. I also see the district I'm in moving forward with equity practices. There's an equity summit coming up this week, right after Memorial Day. So we worked on equitable grading at the school level.
Mm.
I'm excited to dive into some of these sessions. I'm not speaking at the conference, but really learning more about some more practices that we can use in our buildings and really support our diverse population. And I've also supported a lot with the English language learners, which you now call multilingual learners, in the co-teaching model as well. So that's something that I've done more this year than prior, and I've learned a lot about the co-teaching strategies and how teachers trying to get to that 50-50 split teacher, both of the co-teachers working kind of parallel.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Let me ask you, what are one or two things you have done that have increased attendance? And I'm asking
Mhm.
because attendance after the pandemic, it has
Sure.
become such a big issue because I see that parents are more lenient in allowing their children to stay at home.
Mhm.
In Illinois, they're calling them mental health days. Um, and it's becoming some sort of a trend that whenever there's some sort of challenge, the
Yeah.
student stays home and all they do at home is either play video games or be in social media. What are one or two things you have tried that may have given you success?
Well, I think it's looking at the intrinsic and extrinsic motivators of students. So, and that's often like we have a lot of kids that are kind of slipping through the cracks because a lot of time I've interviewed students and parents when they have those 4+ unexcused absences, right? And that's when it starts becoming an issue. Um, and I know during the 21-22 school year we did have students that were out for a week or so at a time because they had COVID, which really hasn't been so much an issue this year. But like you're saying, this mental health day, and I think when we're talking about students at the middle school level, we will really want to dive deeper and see what's going on. And peer conflicts, right? Bullying, social media harassment, things like that, and really finding out how what other peers are saying, get some evidence, like look at the history on social media, look at the text chain, and see what's happening, bring students in if we need to for a restorative conversation, but also really talk to the parents about the fact that attendance is mandatory. It is students are required in the state of Colorado to attend school until age 17, and then if we have accumulated 10 plus uh, unexcused absences, it will be up for the district student review board and then truancy court. So we really want to catch it before it gets to those 10
Yeah.
unexcused absences, and really help the student find supports, which can be extracurricular activities, clubs. Plug them in with web leaders if they're we're at the beginning of the year and they're new students. But at the school I'm at, there's been a lot of students coming in throughout the year. And since I said I do support the multilingual learners, a lot of those students are, not fluent in English. So plugging them in with buddies, right? A lot of the time, buddies that speak the language that they speak, and also any students that might not be the multilingual learners, but also we also always have these students that they shadow for a day when they're coming to the school as a new student, and then making sure that all the teachers are aware kind of where they're coming from, whether it's an international student or a student that's just coming from another school or district. We had a student come this year to seventh grade who'd only been in a small Montessori school her whole
Ooh,
school
that's a
career. Yeah,
challenge.
yeah, and then coming to a large middle school, large public middle school was a change. But she ended up thriving, found her peer group. So, I was, I was pleasantly surprised, like seeing how she was. She was a very, very good worker and, great student, but also seeing that she found her a space at such a different setting than what she was used to.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Hmm.
So, Dana, like in Back to the Future, if you
Yeah.
could go back at any of the positions you have held in the past,
Hmm.
what would the Dana of today say to the Dana of back then?
Oh gosh. Ah, I guess, it's going back to that blog post I wrote about 20 years ago. My first public school teaching gig in 220 or 2002, 2003. I came from having worked most of my adult life at that time in other countries. I'd been a student in Norway and I worked with tourism, and then I went to Canada to work as a grad, a teaching assistant. So and then I moved to Colorado and I worked in a very conservative district. And, I would probably just tell myself to just be more open to kind of eyes and ears and listening to kind of what the school culture and what the culture of the community was like. I was very naive at the time, right? Um, and then also not taking everything personally. I remember at the time, and I've blogged about it some, like, or I wrote about it a little bit in my book as well. Like, kids really took advantage of, like, teachers, getting their goat, I would say, so to speak, right? With some of that classroom management. And though you learn about classroom management in teacher prep program, I'd been out of the teacher prep program for a couple of years at that point.
Mm,
So, and I'd done my student teaching at an IB magnet school, and then here I was at a regular um, public school with a transient population and kids that, not always choosing to take a second language. So I just remember I had a lot of classroom management issues, kids that, wanted to get a reaction out of me, right? And I think when you're
mm.
a new teacher, if you haven't had um, a similar student teaching experience to what you're doing when you are hired as a teacher, it can be a huge transition. So I probably just tell myself to maybe observe more teachers than other. I did observe teachers in my department, but maybe observe other teachers throughout the building, and talk to them for tips and tricks. I think I did take a lot personally and was frustrated rather than actually learning from others.
Very good advice, and I
Hmm.
think that everybody can identify with that,
Yeah.
especially if you came from a system that has structures in
Hmm.
place and didn't have to address the issues of mismanagement of students. I do concur. Well, it was very similar to me. I came from a system where um, the teacher will say something and you would just do it.
Yeah.
So I came in, and you go to schools of education and they teach you, you do this lesson plan and you do the objectives and
Hmm.
you do the activities and students will do, right? And it was never like that. And I was like, is it me? Is it the school? I agree. There should be much more professional learning on how to address
Hmm.
the what is Marsana calls the reluctant learner. It's not that
Hmm.
they don't want to learn. It's just that you have to make it exquisite for them to reach to the learning. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
It's about developing the relationships with kids, and it did take me
Yeah.
a little bit of time to learn about that because that was not the focus during my teacher prep program. It was more about, like, like you said, the lesson plan, the structures, the just knowing about IEPs and 504s and things like that. But I really didn't learn how to, like, really make it personable for the students, right? And it was all about covering the curriculum when I first started.
Amen. Yeah. Okay. So reading books, as you know, is
Yeah.
a luxury. So
Yeah.
if you have to gift two books,
Yeah.
one fiction and one nonfiction, what will those books be?
Oh, wow. So, well, fiction books, gosh, I've read a lot. But I would say I like Jodi Pichot a lot, and I read her recent, and I know the title is something with bees, um, but it was co-written with Jennifer Finney Boylan, I think is her name, and so it was about bees. So I would say anything by Jodi Pichot, really, for fiction books, and then nonfiction. I mean, I think just going off of any educational books, but I do have a few here because I um, taken them back from the school. So, Leading Equity by Sheldon Akins, and this one that just came out, Assistant Principal Identity by Baruti Capelli. So, great books.
Okay.
And I'm working my way through those. But, I always like to read educational books. Like you said, it's just kind of depends on how much time you have. Right now in the mastermind I'm in, we're reading it's Defining Disability, I think is the name, and I can't come up. I don't have the book in front of me right now, but I can't come up with the author's name. But it's really simple to read. It's just about kind of the history of disability and what is the etiquette to use with disabled people, and just kind of how disability is treated in America. So I think that's an eye opener.
For the viewers and listeners of the
Hmm.
show, can you tell us what a mastermind class is
Hmm.
and why one should join it?
Yeah, so I participate in two masterminds. So I'll talk about the Teach Better Team one. So on Tuesday mornings, 7 a.m. my time is the Teach Better Mastermind, and it's really just there. Every month we have a theme. So it could be evaluations and teacher coaching. It could be recruitment and retention. And then we basically have some prompting questions around that theme, and it's a 45-minute group of leaders who just answer questions and get feedback from one another. And really, it's a good way to start that Tuesday morning once a week. I'm in another one through Better Leaders, Better Schools, and in that book, in that mastermind, we do read books, like I mentioned, this one on defining disability, and we dive into some of the themes in the books. We read, few chapters at a time, and have some guiding questions. So that's half the time of the hour-long mastermind, and then the other half of the hour, we have a hot seat. So we have members who rotate, and somebody's on the hot seat, so they come with a challenge that they're having in their leadership role, and people give some feedback and advice. And For the book study, usually we have people rotate as a facilitator as well, so we can get different people's ideas on how they'd like to approach those book questions, or maybe show a video or something in terms of the book discussion. So yeah, I really get a lot out of those two masterminds, and I think everybody, whether they're currently in a leadership position or they're looking to be an aspiring leader, or they're in a teacher leader role in their school, should join some type of a mastermind. The Mastermind with Teach Better team is free. Just sign up on the Teach Better website.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Hmm.
No excuse to not keep your learning.
Yeah.
Very good. Awesome. So tell me, who is or who are your biggest influences?
Wow. I would definitely say Baruti Kafele, because I showed his book, and he's pumping out those books, usually once a year on, he's really taken off with his assistant principal virtual leadership academy, and just the themes that he's explored. I mean, he's explored equity. He's explored a lot about how the assistant principal role has often been the role of the disciplinarian and how it needs to be more instructional leadership, and that's something that I've viewed for many years as has been an issue, right? That we really need to focus on developing our teachers and getting into classrooms. And then I would say the other influence is Danny Bauer of Better Leaders, Better Schools, who's my friend. I've been connected with him for about 4.5 years now, and just what he does to support leaders. And I mean, he has a lot of not only the masterminds, but, and he has another book coming out now on
Entry plan.
yeah, entry plan.
Mhm.
Thank you. And
I just had him
you
last
just
week in
interviewed
the
him.
yes,
Yeah, I
yes.
did too.
Mhm.
So, and how he just, I mean, he runs small cohorts on different topics and, supporting just the challenges of the job in school administration and connecting leaders as well through masterminds and just through the different web offerings that he has on social media. So, yeah, those two, I definitely get a lot of content and learning from them throughout the week.
Beautiful. Thank you so
Hmm.
much. Kudos to Barudi and Danny, awesome
Hmm.
influencers in the field of education and beyond. So, Dana, how do you address this thing called imposter syndrome when we feel that we might not be good enough to do something or competent enough or just worthy enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I have experienced. And I think it's talking with others who know you well in your field and leaning on them to get that support and hearing from them. And, even though sometimes I'll hear from a colleague, like, uh, the kudos, right? I don't always take it for what it's worth, right? And I think it's really just reflecting on what you've learned throughout the years and how you're positively influencing others. I think there's not going to be a time in your career where you're not going to feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, but it's just seeing how you've grown, right? And seeing how your influence either at the building level or in your realm of the PLN on social media and the content that you're providing, how that helps others. So yeah, I don't say I have a curative on imposter syndrome, but I think it's really just making sure that you are not providing yourself with negative self talk because you are doing something great. Whether you have a big role in education or a small role, you're influencing your students, you're influencing your colleagues as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I was perusing about your book, and it seems
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
this question might be connected to your book. Can you tell us about your book, its journey, its message?
Yes. So here is the book. So it's Out of the Trenches: Stories of Resilient Educators. And so it's not really, so it has the same title as my podcast, and it does have some highlights from guests who were on the podcast, talks about their trench stories, but it also weaves my trench story in just different aspects of my career. I talk a little bit about that first year in K-12 teaching. But a lot of what I ask readers is about defining their why, right? Reevaluating their why as well. For me, at the beginning of my career, my why was teaching world languages and helping students learn about the culture. in the language of those countries. But it changed as I got into teacher leadership positions, and I learned more about just some of the needs that students have, like with attendance and some of the discipline in the hallways and those types of things. So I think I do ask questions of teachers who've been in the classroom in the same grade level for a while, like, because a lot of there are teachers that kind of done the same old for years, and reevaluating the why they might choose to stay in that position or move on. I did see a post yesterday. Chris, who's the Unlock the Middle, one of the co-hosts, he just put out. I mean, after 20 years as a principal in the same middle school, he's moving on to a high school. So and that's like he's redefining his why, right? He's growing, and I think we can all grow. It might not be changing positions, but it's just maybe finding other like duties if you're a teacher, like maybe coaching or sponsoring a club, right? And it could also be maybe helping in education in other ways, if in terms of speaking more at conferences, being a part of a professional organization, things like that. And I think the pandemic was a reset button for a lot of us. There were a lot of people who left education, but I think we don't want people necessarily to leave education, but if they're not happy in their current role, it's really finding what can make you grow and surround yourself by those people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for
Hmm.
sharing that. Before I ask you about your productivity,
Hmm.
let's praise the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So, as you know, Dana, being successful in any field includes being on top of our productivity, but this means different things for different people. What
Hmm.
does it mean to you?
I think it's really having organized schedule and knowing what you're doing throughout the day. In school administration, things come up, but if you have that time that you're sharing with your admin assistant, that this is the administrative time. This is when I'm going to check emails, complete paperwork, finish teacher evaluations, those types of things. That's the undisturbed time I need to be in my office, right? And then I plan for a block of time where I'm going to be in classrooms. So getting in, making that a priority every day. There's going to be fires to put out throughout the day, but I think the more that I'm in the classrooms and visible in the building, the less fires there will be to put out, right? An
Mhm.
administrator's job is, unpredictable. But I think if we can have some of our tasks delegated, right, like you said, to having these forms ready for signature, having a lot of things printed out beforehand. If there's phone calls, making sure that we have an admin assistant we can trust to get the right information from parents or stakeholders. And then in terms of anybody who shows up, because that wasn't an issue for a couple of years, right? Coming to having people show up to the building unannounced,
Yeah.
but now it's become more, main just we do have parents coming, so just making sure that they're able to kind of have that parent get some information from them, and then I come when I'm done with a teacher observation or something like that. So I think it does flow more if you have those structures in place, if you also have a good organizational system, right, in terms of those paper files and online files, and have your tasks delegated with the admin assistants. Concise. And if you're changing schools, it's just also knowing that your admin assistants are your right hand people, right? So they basically help run the school, and you can't be without them.
Beautiful. I'm in the process of transitioning to
Uh huh.
a new school in the
Yeah.
fall.
Okay.
Um, what advice would you give people like me who want to quote unquote train
Yeah.
administrative assistants to work with you? What advice will you provide?
Well, first of all, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that they are people people, right? That because they're the face of the school when we have parents or stakeholders come in. So really see how they're interacting when somebody's coming in person or on the phone. Unfortunately, we do discover sometimes there has been a negative interaction, and we get that later from the parent, right? So really, it could be just simply going through some role play scenarios on how to react to some different things that parents or stakeholders might say. And then also really talking with them through some of the systems in terms of like, what do they do if, teacher really needs to see you right away. Or we have some students who want to come talk to the principal about, something that they like to see change with the school. I think the more you're available, especially for the students, the better relationships you have with them. But also make sure that they know, if you're not in the building or in the office, that there might be a better time to see you. And then also that they know, like the teachers and the students know, like, hey, he is in his office at this particular time usually, and if he's not, you might be able to find him at such and such place. But because I've been so often kind of out and about in the building, if people need me, I have a radio, right? And I can always step out of a classroom and talk to somebody in the hallway for a short period of time. So that's, I just don't, I'm one of those people who has kind of that mobile office and takes the takes the laptop with me, right? So I think if you're letting it be known that, like, hey, he's not always in his office, that like people will be able to find you where you're at, but also there's that undisturbed block of time as well that they need to know is sacred, right? I think it's having that open door policy without actually having your door open the whole time.
Amen. Amen. I
Mhm.
agree with that.
Mm.
Tell us about how do you organize your email and schedule? What are some
Uh-huh.
tips and techniques you can share with the viewers and listeners of the show?
Well, I've gotten a lot of productivity techniques from the Principal Center, and just go on. It's Justin Bader who runs the Principal Center, and just Google that. I've been a member. They have the Instructional Leadership Association, and it goes back like even to 2017. He's done a lot of webinars, so there's like a vault of webinars if you're a member of the Instructional Leadership Association, and it talks a lot about like the inbox zero, for example, and how you do have different folders for different priorities in your email, and also having your administrative assistant flag a lot of the messages that are things that you need to read right away, right? A principal can get, it just depends on where you're at, but you can get 300 to over 1,000 emails per day, right? So it's, a lot of those emails can be just I wouldn't say always spam, but just companies that are looking for, you to buy their books, or you could have a lot of community members that want to come and pitch something, right? So it's having somebody organize those in order of productivity and or order of priority and what you need to see right away versus what really can just go to the junk mail folder. And so the inbox zero, I would highly recommend. And also, I think Danny Bauer's given a lot of different talks throughout the years as well on productivity and having a schedule in place. I think he talks a lot, and he's gotten this from the business world as well. But having the daily a startup routine and a wind down routine, right? When you get to work, my startup routine is always working out, right? And the Teach Better Mastermind, I'm the one who doesn't have the camera on because I'm on my run. it's early in the morning here, so I'm on my
So you
run.
learn as you run. You're learning. You're listening
Yes,
to. Oh
yes. And I'll
wow.
join in
Okay.
on the chat sometimes or unmute.
Okay.
But it's the startup routine for me is the exercise, and then
Mhm.
it's getting into the building, taking care of some of those administrative tasks right before the students arrive. But in the wind down routine, it's really making sure that you've checked off some of those need to do tasks, but you're not taking work home. And that's something, I learned to do as I was kind of transitioning out of the classroom, because when I was teaching, I did take a lot of grading home and things like that. But I realized time home is sacred. There might be phone calls that you have to make sometimes to parents and staff every so often from home. but and sometimes answer emails, but really trying to keep that minimal. And then having also those set time frames that you're going to have those breaks, right? The brain kids need brain breaks, and so do adults, right? So like getting some fresh air. And you know, if you have several buildings on your campus, that's easy because you're going from one building to another. But also just taking a walk break with a student outside goes a
Mm,
long way. Like if you need to dysregulate a student, you know, having them go and just dribble a ball or, you know, play catch with them outside helps a lot. You know, kind of with that conversation piece
yeah,
and really
absolutely.
enjoying the weather. And then duties, like I see that as kind of that brain break as well. If you're outside supervising kiddos or greeting them in the morning and just kind of greeting the day, right? You're helping them get off the bus, but you're also getting that outside time as well because, you know, I'm in Colorado and I like to appreciate the sunlight that we have because we have so many days of sunshine and usually nice weather. So that helps you have a more positive day, I think, is just getting a little bit of that sunlight rather than just being cooped up in the building all day.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So let's talk about the productivity side of
Mhm.
writing a book.
Yeah.
What lessons do you learn about writing a book, and what recommendations do you have for those of us who are thinking about getting to write?
Well, I think once you've signed a contract, so I know some people have already written a book or most of their book before they sign a contract. I had actually only written a few chapters and I had an outline and then I signed the contract. So I had a book to write and I needed to put aside time to, you know, develop the book. So for me, it was setting a goal because I completed a capstone project of the my doctorate. I would say 2 years prior to that. So I'd kind of used some of the same tools that I did during the writing of my capstone and my research. And I just made sure that I spent a certain amount of time per day writing. I know some people like, you know, they'll get up at 4:30 and they'll write for an hour every day. I didn't necessarily do that, but a lot of the writing was during the remote and hybrid um, time period. So I was doing some of that just when there was not there weren't so many kids in the building and there weren't so many fires to put out, so to speak. So it did give me a little bit more productivity time during the day to write, but also writing when the, you know, thoughts come to you, which I do now for blogging. And you have that moment. I know Dave Schmittou, he does a lot of his writing by just talking into the voice recording app on his phone. I didn't do it like that, but I did also take some time during the weekends. I did take a weekend away from my family to write, and I got a lot of writing done. And then I had a goal of how many words I was going to do during certain months, and like what it was going to look like from the time I signed my contract in early August to early November. So like the 90-day goal, right? And
Mm,
then, you know, having a little bit of that body together, and then going with my publisher and then finding out like what were some gaps that I needed to fill, and then revisiting that like 3 months afterwards, and just getting some feedback from other people. I remember talking with Jeff Gargis and um, I think also Josh Stamper. I talked to him as well, and some other authors, just kind of on how to get like more of the writing flowing, so to speak. So, and I think it's like it does take time. You know, it can take several years to get the body of the book written. It just depends kind of what your goals are in terms of when you want it to go into the editing queue with your publisher as well. I was lucky enough to get a contract with my publisher early enough when they were kind of just kicking off, and now they have a lot of people who've signed contracts, so the editing queue is longer. But there was a long time to wait in that queue, and then finally when I got to editing, it did take a few months. So it is like, know that once you have your manuscript done, it's still going to take a while before the book actually comes out, so be patient. I think patience is the key once you've finished your manuscript and it's all kind of in the hands of the publisher.
how does one find a publisher?
Well, I think it's reaching out, right? It's kind of that cold calling situation. If you have a finished manuscript, you can always, ask for a meeting with publishers. I mean, we have several educational publishers out there: EduMatch, Codebreaker, Road to Awesome, and it's requesting a meeting is giving them an idea of what you have or something that you like to write, or ideas about a book, and hearing if that's something that they're interested in. But it's like letting go of that imposter syndrome as well, right?
Mm.
I think a lot of us feel like, we have something to say, but would somebody want to read my book? So that's it. It's also getting encouragement from family and friends, right? Because it is a big undertaking to write a book, right? But everybody has a story to share, and a lot of people who've been in education as long as both of us have been. I mean, we have stories from in the trenches, right? We have stories from what we've learned from our students and staff. And I think, you don't have to be somebody who was a great writer in high school or in college, right? That's what the editor's for. You don't have to sit down, as I said, like Jake Schmidt doesn't do that. You don't have to sit down at a computer necessarily and type it all out. You can record your thoughts as you go. But like, yeah, doing it in your way, and also a lot of people, it helps not having that time frame and just getting the ideas together once you've once an editor's picked up on your idea, or just working on the book first and then pitching it to an editor when you have a semi-finished manuscript at least.
Beautiful. When you s- finally published that book
Hmm.
that you probably have been thinking for a long time,
Yeah.
um, does your eager want to keep writing continues? Does it feel like sometimes I feel that if I sit down to write a book, then I'm gonna have nothing else to say? What is the
Hmm.
feeling of being able to finally publish something and what happens the next day?
Um, well, I'd been waiting for a while after I finished a manuscript for it to be published. So I don't think I would say that I was eager to write another book right away, because I still write the blogs and I put out the podcast content. So I think I have a lot of those spaces to fill my bucket. I mean, a lot of people do write a second book and follow up books. So I'm not closing out that possibility at some point. Um, I think it's like running a marathon or any other type of race. Like, you've worked up towards that goal and then you want to do another one. But it's also really thinking in due time, right? When is the best time to do this other race? When does it work in your schedule? And also, what are some ideas in terms of writing that you can get together that will serve others? So I think right now I'm at that point where I'm just, as I mentioned, some of those titles, just soaking up learning from others. I like putting out the blog post a couple times a month and then serving my school community. So, maybe 3 to 5 years from now, I wouldn't mind putting together ideas for another book. But I know some people crank them out every year, and, I think I'll wait a little bit.
Beautiful. Thank you. And talk to us about your podcasting journey.
Hmm.
I mean, of all the things that you do, you decide I'm also going to work on a podcast, and tell us about what lessons have you learned?
Yeah. So I started my podcast during the pandemic, and it wasn't just I had extra time and thought about starting a podcast. It was also because I'd been thinking for about 9 months prior to that about starting a podcast. I was working on my doctorate at the time. I reached out to Danny Bauer, who's helped a lot of people get their podcast launched, and talked to them about equipment and things like that. So I decided to just launch it. And I knew like I wanted something to do with the trenches, because we're all going through trench periods during our educational journey. And being in the trenches is a positive connotation for some people, but also it can be something we want to get out of, because it's that difficult time. So I talk about that in the book as well. Like, what does the trenches mean to you? And then, like, my premise is I always ask the guest, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out. So I like hearing other people's stories. And really, when I got started, first couple guests were people that I'd worked with, colleagues, and heard a lot from them. And then I got some suggestions for other guests. I was connected to some people on Twitter at the time, but I got connected to a lot more. And through that journey, I also heard about a lot of people on the Teach Better team, and other people that I've been connected to and other authors. So it's really, I would say probably without the podcast, I would not have been connected to so many people that I'm connected to
Mm.
now. And now I'm also thinking about like doing some second episodes with some of my previous guests, because I've had, at this point, I've put out 300, no, not 300, 238 episodes, but I've recorded about 30 more than that. So I've had like 260 guests, or some guests have been repeat guests. So I think also just reaching out. I reached out to Casey Jakobski the other day, who's just put out a new book. So he'll record with me in August. So I think also like really seeing kind of what have some of these people done that I haven't recorded with in a couple of years, and then having them back on again is good. So yeah, I think it's something I'm going to keep doing. Sometimes I have more time than others. Now that school's out, I'll have more time to record, but it ebbs and flows. I have a good stock of episodes, so I let people know there is going to be a little bit of time between recording through when it's actually published. But
Okay.
yeah.
For me, podcasting has become the continuous mastermind.
Hmm.
I find a lot of happiness in getting to learn from people like you, and how you think about things and how you
Hmm.
get organized. And but for me, are the two steps for success, right?
Hmm.
They have to connect with your why, your productivity, and your wisdom.
Hmm.
So, you mentioned several times your blogging journey. What lessons have you learned about blogging, and why do you blog?
Well, I think the lessons I've learned is that there's always a story to share. Something that can be very minute, right? That I experience during the day can also be a thought for other people to learn from, right? So I sometimes just blog about like an interaction that I had with a colleague or a student, right? Or a kindness that was reciprocated through a stranger. So I think it helped that I'd been writing a book at the time when I started blogging, and that I've done. It's not the same as academic writing at all, but I'd put out a few blogs on my website many years prior to that. So it's just being able to make sure that you're fine with putting your ideas out there to a larger group, because being on the Teach Better as a guest blogger, it's going to be a larger group than just if you publish blogs on your website.
Mhm.
So, but I think kind of thinking of, I don't go with themes. I know a lot of bloggers do. They'll like teach happier blog, for example, or, I know Alex Valencic, he does like subbing, blogs about subbing. So I just blog about kind of what comes to me. But I think it's really having that community of people who are also blogging, reading their blogs. I like to read through the blogs and share out other people's blogs. And then also giving like kind of steps for the people who are reading, of what they can think about. Like the other day, I said I wrote about reflecting on the year, some of those things that they can reflect on. So having it be a takeaway, having it be a short read, yet things to take away from that article.
Awesome. And finally, tell us about, you mentioned you run. Tell us
Hmm.
about your why do you exercise, and
Uh-huh.
what is your routine? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I had started running for a little bit, like in 2011 with a mom's group. And I did a 5K then, but then that was it. We trained for a 5K and then I let it go. So I started running again in 2016. I was going through a difficult time, and I'm like, I really need to just, be diligent about this, because it's about starting a new habit, right? It's like, you don't want to, but it's like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to run a mile or however long. And I didn't really consult a training plan when I started. I just said, I'm going to set aside this time. I downloaded an app. And I just got into it. I did start out in 2016 with a lot of 5Ks, and then I moved down kind of end of 16, early 17 with more 10Ks. So I worked up the distance. And then I did, I think even in the spring of 17, I did like 25Ks, which is like 15 miles and half marathons the following fall. So I worked up the distance pretty quickly. And so I think it's just making sure that you keep consistent. I run about 3 times a week in the early mornings. I make sure Saturdays I have time to do a couple hours because recently I'd been training for a marathon. So it was like several hours of running. And now, yesterday, even though, I'm done, I did still a lot shorter distance, but still was out there for a couple hours. But I did kind of a lot of run walking, right? And it kind of also depends on the terrain. Like I'm not somebody who always runs up hills. Like I'll do a lot of walk breaks. So it's
Yeah.
like not being judging on yourself. Like it's just like kind of like with the writing and the imposter syndrome when you're running, like don't compare yourself to others because I'm like a slow runner and I've gotten slower because I have knee issues. So I don't like try to get a certain minute per mile pace. I can't necessarily do the same minute per mile that I did like 5 years ago. But it's doing as long as you can until like quote unquote your body gives out, right? And hopefully I'll still be able to run for a little while longer. I know my knees not getting any better, but I do also the cross training, the yoga,
Mm.
the weights and things like that. So it does help my mental health and it helps my productivity just to have that workout in the morning.
Beautiful. When you run or do exercise, do you listen to something? Or and if so, what do you listen to?
hmm so I do like when I do the long runs on Saturdays, I listen to music. But the other times during the week, I listen to podcasts. So I listen. I have like on rotation. I do Leading Equity with Sheldon Akins. I do Better Leaders, Better Schools with Danny Bauer, the Principal Center with Justin Bader. I also listen to Middle School Matters, and I forgot the names of the hosts. But I also do listen to a couple of running podcasts. Another Mother Runner, and then the Rich Roll podcast, which is more like
Mm.
lifestyle and just a thought leaders. He talks to a lot of different people who've written books just kind of on meditation and plant-based diets and things like that. So I try to mix it up and not just listen to educational
Oh
podcasts.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And
Mhm.
Dana, anything else that you do for fun?
I mean, I like to travel. so
Tell us about it.
This summer I'm going to actually see a friend and colleague, Corrine Veldoen. She was on my podcast about a year ago. So I'll be traveling via Seattle up to British Columbia. So
Mm.
yeah, so we're taking about a 10-day trip, seeing Vancouver, and she lives in kind of the middle of British Columbia. So just I like to see new places that I hadn't seen. Every summer, and we've usually gone to Europe every 2 or 3 years. So we went last year, and I'll probably go again next year. Um, so the mastermind with Better Leaders, Better Schools, they're coming to Denver this summer, so I don't have
Mm.
to travel for that. But I like going. They did like Taos, New Mexico, a year and a half ago. So if it's a short retreat that's not too far
Mhm.
away, I like going to those things. Traveling for conferences like the Teach Better conference. And I'll be at AMLE. I like kind of having an excuse to go somewhere for the weekend, right? So you don't always get to see the area if you're going to a
Mhm.
conference, but if you have time, maybe build on an extra day to explore more. But like, yeah, I'm always kind of restless to like get away for either a weekend or a week or so. And I do take that opportunity in the summers always to go on a 10-day or more trip with the family.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. What a great
Mhm.
learning time I just spent with you. Dana, any last thoughts for the viewers and listeners of the show?
I would say, like, going back to that imposter syndrome and the learning that you get from others, it's like really hear from others, grow, don't take things personally, and know that you're ever changing and evolving, and being open to feedback helps you become a better educator.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much. I hope that you have a fantastic Sunday.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez.
Chulo.
And as of that production, chill out.